This is 4.1 Ethical, Legal and Health and Safety Issues in S&ES Research. Key terms and background. Ethical is the moral principle that govern a person's behaviour or the conducting of an activity. The ethics for people is what is right, so allowed to be done, and what is wrong, so what isn't allowed to be done, where no physical or emotional harm occurs. Legal is working within the boundaries of the civil law, so not doing anything that is against the law and only doing things that is within the law, which is called legal. Health and safety is regulation and procedures intended to prevent accident or injury in workplaces or public environments that have to be in place. Some historical context of these ethical and legal issues is the Nazis conducting experiments at Auschwitz on people that were not willing and torturing them in order to get results. Some names of the experiments are malaria, malaria experiments, mustard gas experiments, and bone, muscle, and nerve transplantation experiments. All of these experiments went against the ethical and legal principles as none of the subjects were willing to take part, and there was also mass amounts of psychological and physical harm caused to them. There is also the Declaration of Helsinki, which was created in 1964 by the WMA. The Declaration of Helsinki is a set up of ethical principles regarding human experimentation developed for the medical community by the World Medical Association. The Declaration of Helsinki is similar to the Nuremberg Code in terms of what it states. This is because it also states that it is essential to be volunteered, the benefits showed outweigh the risks, and that no physical or psychological harm should be caused to the client. In 1947, the Nuremberg Code was created, which had 10 points which must be complied with before experimentation is done. These main outcome of these points was that all subjects must be volunteers, and that studies are necessary and based on good science. Benefits must outweigh the risk. Participants must have the right to withdraw, and that the experiments must be conducted by a qualified researcher. BASIS stands for the British Association of Sport and Exercise Science. The role of BASIS is to produce a code of conduct for sport and exercise science practitioners and researchers. They also outline ethical and legal issues and health and safety guidelines. The summary of BASIS Code of Conduct is to set out principles of conduct and research ethics for the guidance of members of the association. This is Scenario 1. There were good and bad practices from Scenario 1. The two good practices that we had were subject permission, as the participants to this experiment were under the age of 18, so they had to get subject permission from their adults, which did happen. And the other being a risk assessment. They had put a risk assessment in beforehand before doing this test for the participants' health and safety, and not putting them at any risk to injury or harming them in any other way. However, there were also poor practices. One poor practice was with the respect, as they asked participants to wear their swimwear. This isn't respectful to them, as they may feel uncomfortable wearing their swimwear in front of certain people just in this environment, as they might not know everyone there, and might not know the researcher as well, so they may feel uncomfortable for this. So the correction for this would be to tell them what they're going to be doing in the activities. So for this example, they were going to be getting wet as they were going into a bath. So they said that they need to wear the right attire for this, but the attire that they feel comfortable, so that they know if they don't want to do this, they can then have the right to withdraw. The next being confidentiality and deception. This was a poor practice, as they at the end of the test they wrote down all of the scores on the boards of everyone's results, and so everyone was able to see this. This is poor, as they should have kept it confidential, and not showed it to everyone else, as they may have felt embarrassed by their scores or not wanted others to find out what their scores were, so they can compare them and make other people feel worse if they had a worse result, or so on. So the correction to this would be to not put it on the board and keep it confidential to themselves, and just put it on a piece of paper that they can look at and then compare where no one else can see it. The final poor practice being informed consent. However, they did do an informed consent for the participants, but they only did a generic one, so they didn't explain to the parents fully what they were going to be doing in the test. They just abbreviated it and said what tests they were going to do and how they were going to do them. So the correction for this would be when they were doing the informed consent for the parents, they then went into full depth of what they were going to be participating in, what they were going to be doing, how long it was going to be taking, where, and so on, so that they got a full debrief of what they were letting their child do, so then they could make their decision on whether they wanted to let them do it or not. From these poor practices, there can be consequences to the participant and the researcher. Consequences from these poor practices could be psychological, from where their results have been put on the board, so they could be worried about who sees their results and what everyone thinks about it, so that can really get to their head and make them feel uncomfortable. And then also another psychological one, and you could also say physical with this, as some weren't allowed to withdraw, so that they would feel uncomfortable in the situation and pressured, where this could then upset them massively, and also could cause harm to them if they wanted to withdraw because of a harmful situation, and then it led to them getting hurt. From this, the consequences to the researcher could be bad publicity, as they pressured the participants into wearing something certain, so that they could get known for pressuring the participants in, especially as they didn't let them withdraw as well. This could also do this, and it could also make them have a formal reprimand, so they could see potentially a temporary suspension, as they have gone against the rules here, so they could get they could be suspended and just suspended. So from this, I created an informed consent for them to use, for myself to use as well, for this tests. I also did the same for a risk assessment, and here it is. Scenario 2. The same as scenario 1 for scenario 2, there were good and bad practices for this scenario. The first one being preparation of the subject. In this scenario and the testing, they did a warm-up, which is a great preparation of the subject. Another one being as they contacted the HSE, so they would have put in all health and safety precautions in with guidance, managing the risk, the employer's responsibility, and RIDDOR. And the final one being laboratory safety procedures. They put these procedures in as they made sure all hygiene was kept at a good level and there wasn't anything dirty there. And they also had a good ratio of researchers to participants, so that they had enough researchers there that the participants, if there were any risks, that there were enough researchers there to cover all participants, so that they weren't put at any risk. In this scenario, there were also poor practices. The first being first aid procedures. When one of the participants got injured in the test, the researcher did not know where the first aid kit was. So this is bad, as they weren't able to treat the injured, and it could have led to further injury or more serious injury. The correction for this should be to know where the nearest first aid kit is and the nearest first aider is, so that they can treat any participants that get injured during the test. The next poor practice being right to withdraw, as they did not let the participants stop when they put their thumbs down during the test. This is bad, as in any testing for a researcher, the participants should always have a right to withdraw at any time that they want to, whether it's before, during, or after the test is done. So the correction for this would have been, if any participants asked to withdraw from the test, just to let them and have a safe place for them to go to where they aren't on their own and still got someone looking after them, and maybe even if it's needed to check if they're harmed, or if they're physically harmed or psychologically harmed. So the next poor practice is equality and impartiality. So after this happened with the right to withdraw from the person getting injured, um, this then stopped a lot of times there as they didn't know where the first aid kit was, so they had to find other stuff to do it with. So it's cut some time. So then the researcher decided to do the better boys first, as it was said. This is bad as all participants to the test are all equal, so there should be no better boys first or anything like that, and it would have made other the other kids not feel too great about themselves either. So the correction to this would be to not prioritise them and to carry on in the same order that they were doing, but if they needed to cut the test, like do less testing, but still do the same testing on everyone, or find a different solution around it to cutting out some people. The next one being data protection, as they published the data 2 weeks later in a different presentation. This is poor as the data should have been kept confidential, as this is what they had told the participants were. So the correction would be to not use this data and find some other data that was off the internet or that was allowed to be used in a presentation that other people can see. The final poor practice was reasons for terminating the test, as they didn't end the test when the participant was in discomfort when they should have. So the correction for this would be to end the test when they should have, and when the participant felt uncomfortable, so the participant could stop the testing and get some help. From these poor practices, there are consequences to the participant and the researcher. The consequences of the participant would be physical harm, as they wasn't able to treat his injury with a first aid kit, so this could have led to further harm. And then another one would be psychological harm, as they might feel embarrassed by their results being shown out, and this could have maybe upset them and got to their head. And the final one being another psychological harm, as they weren't allowed to withdraw, so they could have felt in discomfort and at unease. Consequences to the researcher would be criminal law, as they could be fined due to them not letting them withdraw, and then this resulting in injury as well. And then another one would be formal reprimand, so this would be the termination of the contract if sued. And the final one being ethical training. If they weren't sued, then they'd have training applied of what they need to improve on and what they should have done.